My name is Grace Miller, and I am 72 years old. At this age, one expects certain things from family: respect, consideration, perhaps even gratitude for decades of sacrifice. What I never expected was to become a punchline in my own son's love story. It happened on a Tuesday morning, just 5 days before Ethan's wedding. I was at my dining room table, a yellow legal pad spread in front of me, the margins filled with my spidery handwriting. Shrimp, halibut, chicken skewers, pasta salads. Next to me, a pocket calculator and the invoices I'd already paid. $3,000 out of my pension savings for food alone. I'd spent hours on the phone with vendors, negotiating prices, calling in favors, even reserving refrigeration space in the neighbor's garage because the fish order would never fit in mine. Every number I penciled felt heavy but necessary. Ethan had always been the dreamer, the child who wanted to see the ocean at midnight, who asked for second helpings of clam chowder, who told me once at 10 years old, "Mom, when I get married, it will be by the sea." And so, decades later, here I was, stitching his boyhood wish into reality with my tired hands and thinning checkbook. That morning the house smelled faintly of onions and dill from the trial run of potato salad I'd made at dawn. The curtains fluttered with a breeze from the open patio doors. I heard birdsong, the sound of distant waves, and then Brooke's voice, sharp as a thorn beneath velvet. She was out on the patio with her phone, speaking to her sister Amber. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her words slipped in uninvited like smoke under a door. "The old lady will watch all 15 kids the whole night for free. She won't even bother the adults." There was a pause, then Amber's laugh, shrill, conspiratorial, the kind of laugh women share when they believe they've outsmarted someone. For a second my pen stopped mid-sum. My breath caught, and I looked up at the sunlight dancing through the curtains as if to steady myself. The old lady. That was me. Not Grace. Not Mom. Not the woman who had made Brooke's favorite lemon pies, who had welcomed her like a daughter these past 2 years, who had smiled every time she chirped, "Miss Grace, your cooking is heavenly." No. Just the old lady. A free babysitter. Invisible except for my utility. I sat perfectly still, the pen still hovering above the word halibut. The laughter outside seemed to grow louder in my ears. It was not just the insult of the nickname. It was the assumption, the unspoken decree, that I would be there to herd children, wipe noses, tie shoes, and keep chaos contained while the adults sipped champagne and danced in candlelight. Without ever being asked. Without a moment's thought that I might want to sit at the table, not stand behind it. The sliding glass door opened then, and Ethan walked out, barefoot, hair mussed from sleep. He stepped behind Brooke, kissed her cheek and glanced toward me at the dining room table. "Mom," he said warmly, "you amaze me. You're doing all this and still look full of energy. Everyone's going to say you're the reason this wedding is perfect." I forced a smile because that's what mothers do. I nodded, swallowing the words that crowded in my throat. He never noticed Brooke's smirk as she mouthed something to Amber. Never noticed the glance of triumph she threw over her shoulder at me as if to say, "See? He'll never doubt me. You'll always play the helper, never the guest." I bent my head back over the pad, scribbling numbers I could no longer see clearly. My chest felt tight, my pulse heavy in my ears. Ethan returned inside, humming as he passed, oblivious. Brooke's laughter rose again from the patio, and I knew with a clarity as sharp as broken glass. My love had been repackaged as labor, my devotion reduced to unpaid service. It was not the first time. That realization cut deeper than Brooke's words. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller moments. When Ethan would ask for help with bills but never ask how I was managing mine. When Brooke would hand me her coat at gatherings as if I were a coat rack. When decisions about holidays were made without me but the cooking always landed in my lap. I had ignored those cracks, telling myself it was the natural rhythm of families, that mothers give more than they take. But now, hearing myself dismissed as the old lady, I finally saw it for what it was: a pattern, a plan. I placed the pen carefully on the table and folded my hands in my lap. The potato salad in the kitchen was starting to sour in the heat, but I no longer cared. What grew inside me was colder, steadier. A line drawn in sand I had never dared to draw before. For a long while I sat like that, motionless, my gaze fixed on the half-finished list. Hurt washed through me first, hot and sharp. Then anger, curling up from a place I thought age had quieted. And finally something cleaner than both, resolve. I would not play along. I would not be their unpaid servant, their silent help, their invisible shadow. If they had already written my role as the old lady babysitter, I had every right to set fire to the script. Brooke's laughter rang again from outside, and this time I did not flinch. I rose slowly from the table, gathering my pad, calculator, and receipts. Each step upstairs felt like stepping out of a costume I had worn too long. My knees ached, but my back was straighter than it had been in years. I passed the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. Silver hair pinned back, apron smudged with flour, shoulders stooped from years of carrying others' burdens. For a fleeting second, I saw what Brooke must see. A tired, convenient woman whose usefulness was taken for granted. And yet behind my reflection, in my eyes, something had shifted. Not weakness. Not resignation. A hardness like steel cooling after fire. I carried the pad into the bedroom where my late husband David had once slept beside me for 3 decades. The nightstand still held photographs. Ethan at 5 years old on his first bike, Ethan at 18 in his graduation gown, Ethan at 23 with his first apartment key in hand. Each picture told the story of sacrifices I had made quietly, proudly. And yet here I was erased into the help. My fingers brushed the frame of the graduation photo, and I whispered into the still room. No more. Outwardly, I knew I would keep playing along for a little while longer. The buffet would remain in progress. The decorations on schedule. But inside me a different plan was taking shape. A plan Brooke could never anticipate, because she believed I was incapable of saying no. That Tuesday morning I became someone new. Not just a mother. Not just an old woman, but a woman with boundaries. And when the day of the wedding came, Ethan and Brooke would learn the cost of mistaking devotion for servitude. After Brooke's words sank into me like poison, I went upstairs, carrying that yellow pad like a useless shield. The bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing in the stale air of memory. David's side of the bed was still made neatly, as though he might return at any moment. It had been 12 years since his heart failed in the middle of one ordinary afternoon, yet I still kept his nightstand untouched. The alarm clock he never used, the reading glasses folded neatly on a book halfway through, the photo of us on the pier with the ocean wind tangling my hair and his arm wrapped firmly around me. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, my body sinking into the mattress that had absorbed 3 decades of our weight. I let the pad fall beside me and stared at the photographs lined along the dresser. Ethan's first bike, his first day at school, his clumsy grin with braces, the summer we spent near the ocean when he was 16 and convinced he'd be a marine biologist. Every picture told the same story. A boy carried by his mother's sacrifices. The second job I took cleaning offices so he could join the soccer team. The evenings I ate canned soup so he could have a new jacket. The nights I stayed awake over bills while he slept peacefully in his room. And later, when Brooke came into our lives, I opened the same arms that had always been open to Ethan. She was polite then, even sweet. She would bring me flowers just because, praise my pecan pies as if they were treasures, ask me to teach her family recipes. For 2 years I believed her. I believed I had gained a daughter, not just through law but through affection. I let myself imagine holidays together, grandchildren tumbling through my kitchen, warmth filling the spaces David had left behind. But that Tuesday, with one careless sentence, she stripped the disguise away. The old lady will watch all 15 kids. A hired nanny, unpaid, drafted without permission. My worth reduced to utility. I pressed my palms to my knees and let the silence of the room wrap around me. For the first time in years, I felt anger not as a fleeting sting but as a steady pulse. And with it came something I had never dared: choice. For decades I had lived as though my yes was the only answer possible. When Ethan needed money, I gave it. When Brooke hinted she wanted my lemon pies, I baked them. When relatives assumed I would host, I said nothing and cooked for 20. But silence is not virtue. It is surrender. That afternoon I called Nora. Nora has been my friend since high school. The kind of woman who never softened her words to spare your feelings. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk as always. "Grace, you sound strange. What's wrong?" I told her everything. Every word Brooke had said, every laugh, every memory of my sacrifices that now felt like foolish offerings at the altar of entitlement. My throat tightened as I spoke, but I forced myself not to cry. I had cried enough in secret. Nora was silent for a moment. Then her voice came sharp and clear. Grace, listen to me. They are using you. This isn't about love or respect. This is about convenience. And you need to stop. I don't want to ruin his wedding, I whispered. He's my only son. You won't ruin it, she snapped. You'll just stop ruining yourself. Her words struck something inside me. Stop ruining myself. I closed my eyes and let the idea settle. It wasn't war I was preparing. It was boundaries. And boundaries are not cruelty, they are dignity. That night I sat at my kitchen table again, not to calculate fish and salads but to make my own list. A plan. I would not cook the buffet. I would not babysit 15 children. I would not allow guilt to twist me back into servitude. 3 simple rules. But for me they were as revolutionary as tearing down walls. I thought of the letter I might leave Ethan. The words formed slowly in my mind. Son, I learned I was assigned a job without being asked. I canceled the buffet. I will not be the unpaid nanny. I will be gone for the weekend. With love and with dignity. Mom. Even imagining those words brought me a strange calm. I pictured Brooke's face when she discovered there would be no endless trays of food, no free childcare, no silent labor from the old lady. I pictured Ethan's confusion, his voice rising, the excuses he would make for her. And for once I pictured myself not bending. I remembered David's voice, low and steady the night before his heart gave out. Grace, he had said, squeezing my hand. Don't let anyone make you small. For 12 years I had ignored that warning. But sitting there with Brooke's laughter still echoing in my ears, I finally understood. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking loud in the still house. My hands trembled as I lifted it, but not from weakness. From awakening. Tomorrow I would start making the calls. Vendors. Florists. Caterers. Each one would hear the same polite words. I'm afraid I must cancel. I would pay the small fees, accept the minor losses. Better that than continuing to bleed silently for people who saw me only as service. I thought of Ethan as a boy, standing at the edge of the ocean with his pants rolled up, the waves tugging at his ankles. One day, Mom, he had said, I'll get married by the sea and you'll sit in the front row. And I had believed him. I had carried that promise for decades like a jewel in my pocket. Now I understood what he really meant. I would sit, yes, but in the shadows, never at the table, never as the guest of honor, only as the invisible hands behind the curtain. No more. I set my empty glass down and looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had packed Ethan's school lunches, where David and I had slow danced on New Year's Eve, where I had baked pies for Brooke to win her over. The air smelled of dill and onions still lingering from the morning's trial salad. I opened the window and let the scent drift out, like the last of my illusions. I did not sleep that night. I lay in David's bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick steadily on his nightstand. Each tick sounded like a drumbeat, urging me toward the choice I had already made. By morning my plan was clear. Outwardly I would continue preparing so they would not suspect. Inwardly I would begin withdrawing. Quietly, without drama. Not revenge, not cruelty, just boundaries. And for the first time in years I felt something close to freedom. By Thursday morning, the decision in my chest had hardened into something unmovable. A stone where softness used to be. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my vendor list, and began dialing numbers. The first call was to the seafood supplier. A cheerful young man answered, already expecting me to confirm the final order. I steadied my voice. I'm afraid I need to cancel, I told him. He hesitated. Mrs. Miller, are you sure? Everything's reserved for Saturday. Yes. I'll pay the cancellation fee. Send me the invoice. There was silence on the line, the kind that carries surprise but no real objection. Within minutes it was done. One by one I repeated the ritual, the florist, the rental company, the bakery. Each conversation ended the same way, polite, professional, final. By noon the entire wedding buffet, the extra flower arrangements, the surplus of chairs and linens, all of it was gone. It felt like dismantling a stage set that had never been mine to perform on. Every cancellation stripped away another layer of the role Brooke had assigned me. The old lady will feed the guests. The old lady will manage the chaos. The old lady will stand quietly in the background. Not anymore. When I hung up the last call, the kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock above the stove. I looked at my hands, still trembling slightly. They had cooked thousands of meals, ironed endless shirts, carried grocery bags heavier than I should have. And now they had carried out something even harder: refusal. On Friday, I packed a small suitcase. 2 days' worth of clothes. My medications. A worn paperback novel that had been gathering dust on the shelf because I never had the time to sit and read. I placed them neatly inside and zipped the case shut. The sound felt like sealing a chapter. The phone rang twice that afternoon, Ethan checking in. "Everything under control, Mom?" he asked brightly. "Yes," I replied. And it was true, though not in the way he believed. It was under my control. Instead of a spa retreat, which had been my original fantasy for after the wedding, I went online and booked a flight. Saturday morning, Los Angeles to Seattle. From there, a ferry across the bay to stay with old friends who had long invited me to visit. People who asked for nothing more from me than my company. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at the screen for a long time. The black letters on the white page felt like freedom printed in ink. Before leaving, I wrote a letter to Ethan. My handwriting was shaky but firm. "Son, I learned I was assigned to babysit 15 children on your wedding night. I was not asked. I was not consulted. That is not respect, it is assumption. I have canceled the buffet. I will be away this weekend, returning Sunday night. With love and with dignity. Mom." I left the note on the kitchen table where he would find it when the calls went unanswered. Then I placed my keys and wallet beside my packed suitcase and sat down to wait for morning. The hours crawled. I thought of David. He had always loved ferries, the slow rocking of the boat, the salt wind in his hair. I imagined telling him what I was about to do. "Finally, Grace," he would have said. "Finally, you stood up for yourself." That night I could not sleep. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made for Ethan. The second job at the office, the home-cooked meals after 12-hour days, the money I quietly lent him when he and Brooke couldn't quite cover rent. Each sacrifice had been swallowed whole, never acknowledged, never repaid. My heart burned at the memory, but underneath the fire there was steel. When dawn broke, I was already dressed. At 5:40 a.m., I stood at LAX with my boarding pass in hand. My phone buzzed with missed calls. First Ethan, then Brooke, then numbers I didn't recognize. By boarding time, the calls had doubled. I powered the phone down, the screen going black like the curtain falling after a long play. As the plane lifted off, banking over the coastline, I pressed my forehead to the window. The Pacific shimmered below, vast and indifferent. For the first time in years, I exhaled not for anyone else but for myself. When we landed in Seattle, I turned my phone back on. It vibrated violently, messages flooding in like angry bees. "Mom, Brooke is crying. Where's the food? We have kids everywhere. Where are you? This is a disaster. Please answer." I let the words scroll across the screen while I sat at a small cafe near the pier, a steaming croissant on my plate and coffee in my hands. The ferry horn sounded in the distance, a low, soothing song. 4 years my days had begged *in with duty. Wake early, cook, clean, plan, give. That morning I began with choice. My choice. I typed back a single sentence. "I'm safe. I'm not the staff. Hire what you need." Then I set the phone face down on the table and took a bite of my croissant, buttery flakes scattering onto the napkin. The world had not ended. The villa had not collapsed. The children were still laughing somewhere, the ocean still beating against the shore. The only thing that had ended was my servitude. I smiled into my coffee. For the first time in decades, the bitterness tasted like freedom. The moment the wheels of the plane touched the tarmac in Seattle, I felt the faintest tremor ripple through my body. It wasn't turbulence, it was release. For 72 years, my choices had been wrapped in others' needs, others' plans, others' comfort. Now the act of landing in a city where no one expected me to cook, clean, or babysit felt like touching down in my own skin for the first time. I waited for the seatbelt light to blink off, gathered my small bag, and moved with the line of passengers toward the exit. My phone vibrated again in my purse, frantic as a trapped insect. I didn't look at it. I stepped into the terminal with only the sound of rolling suitcases and distant loudspeaker announcements. By the time I boarded the ferry, the morning fog was lifting from the bay. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and clean. I stood at the railing, the wind tugging at my jacket, and let the salt air sting my eyes. Somewhere hundreds of miles south, Brooke was realizing the buffet would never arrive, the decorations would be less grand, the old lady babysitter had vanished. I wondered if she would curse me, or if she would still believe I was bluffing and might walk in at the last moment with platters of food. The phone buzzed again. I pulled it out and stared at the notifications. Dozens of missed calls. Dozens of messages. Mom, we need you. Please, just this one day. Brooke is in tears. Where's the buffet? What about the kids? There was no how are you? No, are you okay? No, do you want to be here? Only demands thinly disguised as panic. I set the phone on the railing and considered dropping it into the gray water. Instead, I powered it off and slipped it back into my purse. Boundaries didn't require dramatic gestures. They required consistency. When the ferry docked, my friend Margaret was waiting at the pier. She was my age, her hair silver like mine, but her posture carried the easy strength of a woman who had learned long ago to say no. She hugged me without asking questions, without commentary. Just the warmth of someone who understood. I made up the guest room, she said. Come rest. Her house overlooked the bay. A modest two-story with a wide porch and potted geraniums. The air smelled of salt and cedar, nothing of dill or onions or wedding stress. I set my bag down in the room, sat on the neatly made bed, and let silence fill me. For once, silence was not heavy with expectation. It was light, expansive. That afternoon, Margaret poured us tea on the porch. I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with a storm of messages. Ethan's voice on voicemail was tight, frantic. Mom, where are you? Brooke's crying. The caterers say you canceled. We don't have enough food. Parents are asking who's watching the kids. Mom, please call me back. In another message, his tone shifted, bargaining. We'll pay you. Just come. We'll figure it out later. Please. And Brooke's text, sharp and accusing. You promised us. You ruined everything. I let the words scroll across the screen, then set the phone down. Margaret raised an eyebrow. They're panicking, I said simply. And you? She asked. I'm breathing. I picked up my cup and took a sip. The tea was hot, fragrant with mint. I let it linger on my tongue before swallowing. It was the taste of boundaries, strange, unfamiliar, but unmistakably mine. That evening, as the sun dropped low over the water, painting the horizon gold and crimson, I finally called Ethan back. My voice was calm, steady, as if years of swallowed words had sharpened into clarity. He answered on the first ring. The chaos behind him bled through the line. Clattering dishes, children crying, voices overlapping. Mom, where are you? Where's the buffet? Where are you? I was on a plane, I said evenly. Now I'm at the pier, having a croissant. Silence, then disbelief. What? Mom, this isn't funny. We need you. No, I corrected. You need a caterer. You need hired childcare. What you don't need is to assume I'll sacrifice myself without being asked. Brooke's voice cut in, sharp and trembling. You promised. You said you'd help. I promised as a guest, not as staff. Need childcare? Hire it. 15 kids at $10 an hour each, 6 hours, that's $900. Cheap compared to the $3,000 I was covering for your food. The line went silent except for a baby crying in the background. Then someone shouted angrily, voices colliding into chaos. That was answer enough. I pulled the phone away, pressed mute, and stared out over the water. The bay was calm, the sky deepening into dusk. My breathing slowed. For the first time in years, I wasn't suffocating on obligations. I wasn't drowning under expectations. I was floating. Later, when I unmuted, Ethan's voice had dropped to pleading. Mom, please. We can't fix this without you. Yes, you can, I replied. You're both adults. Figure it out. I ended the call before he could argue further. My hand shook slightly, but not from fear, from release. That night, I slept in Margaret's guest room with the window cracked open. The sound of waves filled the space where panic usually lived. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, no longer a leash, just an object. In the dark, I whispered into the quiet. No is a sentence. And it's mine. And for the first time in decades, I slept without dreaming of unfinished tasks, unpaid bills, or ungrateful voices. The next morning, I woke in Margaret's guest room with the scent of fresh coffee drifting up the stairs. The sheets were crisp, the pillow still cool where my head had rested. For years, mornings meant rushing into the kitchen to prepare for someone else. Ethan's breakfast, David's work thermos, later Brooke's requests for pies or side dishes. This morning I padded downstairs barefoot, unhurried, and found Margaret humming over the stove. "Sit," she said, pouring me a cup. No one had ordered me to sit in decades. I obeyed gladly. The phone on the table buzzed like a wasp. I flipped it over. Ethan's name lit the screen. I sighed and pressed answer. "Mom." His voice was jagged, frayed at the edges. In the background I heard clattering dishes, children shrieking, voices raised. "Where's the buffet? Where are you?" I lifted the cup of coffee, inhaling the steam before replying. My tone was level, steady. I was on a plane. Now I'm at the pier having a croissant. A pause. Then disbelief. "What? You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "Promises stand when there's respect. A nanny is hired, not assigned." There was rustling on the line, and then Brooke's voice cut in, sharp as broken glass. "You promised us. You told us you'd help." "I promised to come as a guest," I corrected. "Not as staff. If you need childcare, hire it. $10 an hour per child, 15 children, 6 hours, $900. That's cheap compared to the $3,000 I was covering for your food." For a long beat, the line went silent except for a baby crying and someone shouting in the background. Then chaos erupted, voices overlapping, dishes clattering harder, the sound of someone near tears. "Mom," Ethan said again, his voice breaking between pleading and anger. "This isn't the time for speeches. People are asking where you are. Parents are furious. We can't do this without you." I let the silence stretch before answering. "Yes, you can. You're adults. You chose this. Now manage it." I ended the call. My hand shook as I set the phone down, but not from fear. From clarity. Margaret, sitting across from me, raised her brows. That sounded intense. "They expected me to work for free while they celebrated," I said simply. "I decided not to." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "About time, Grace." I laughed softly, surprised at the sound. Laughter had been scarce in my house these past years, swallowed under duty. But the peace didn't last long. By afternoon my phone had filled with more messages. Ethan tried bargaining. "Mom, just come for the kids. Forget the food. I'll pay you $500. Okay, $2,000. Please, Mom. Brooke's having a breakdown." I stared at the words. If he had $2,000 ready to throw at me now, why hadn't he spent that on a caterer in the first place? The truth was bare. It had always been easier to use me. I typed back only one sentence. "If you had money for me now, you had money for a caterer then." Minutes later, Brooke called directly. I let it ring. The voicemail came sharp and accusing. "You ruined my wedding. You destroyed everything." I pressed delete. In the evening, as the sun sank red into the bay, I sat on Margaret's porch with a blanket around my shoulders, sipping tea. The phone buzzed again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Miller?" A man's voice, low, strained. "This is Michael, Brooke's father." I blinked. We had spoken only once before, at a brief dinner. "Yes. I just wanted to say, I think what they did to you was wrong. Expecting you to handle all that, treating you like hired help, it was shameful. I told them so." For a moment I had no words. An ally from the most unlikely place. "Thank you," I said finally. "Don't let them guilt you," he continued. "You did right." When the call ended, I sat very still, the waves lapping against the shore below. Even Brooke's own father saw it. The truth was undeniable. That night, Margaret handed me a quilt and said, "Sleep easy, Grace. The storm is theirs, not yours." But in the quiet darkness, I thought about Ethan's voice. Frantic, pleading, then bargaining. My son, who once stood on the beach at 10 years old and said, "Mom, when I marry, you'll sit in the front row." And now at 34, he hadn't wanted me in the front row at all. He had wanted me behind the kitchen doors, behind the children's playpen, invisible. The grief pressed heavy, but underneath it, a strange strength grew. Boundaries hurt, but they hold. When I finally slept, I dreamed not of chaos at the villa, but of calm water stretching endlessly, carrying me forward. By Saturday evening, my phone had become a theater of desperation. Each buzz, each ding was another act in a play I had finally stopped performing in. I sat in Margaret's sunlit kitchen, sipping chamomile tea, while chaos brewed hundreds of miles away in a rented villa where my absence was louder than any speech I could have given. The first voicemail I dared to listen to came from Ethan. His tone was different now, strained, cracking like wood under pressure. "Mom, it's a disaster. The kids are everywhere. One just knocked over the cake. 2 more are hiding under the main table, and their parents are furious. People keep asking about the buffet. They're starving, Mom. We ordered some snacks, but it's not enough. Please just come." I pictured it clearly. The elegant villa by the shore, candles flickering, the expensive photographer clicking nervously as children wailed in the background. Guests expecting salmon and shrimp now handed greasy pizza slices to their toddlers. The pristine cake, once the centerpiece, smeared and sagging. Another voicemail came minutes later, his voice rising toward anger. "500, Mom. I'll give you 500 cash right now if you just come help with the kids. Forget the food, just the kids. Please. Please." The next message escalated further. 2,000. "I'll transfer it this minute. Just come." I let the words wash over me, detached, almost clinical. If he had $2,000 to throw at me in a panic, then he had always had money for a caterer. He simply hadn't wanted to spend it. My labor, my love, had always been cheaper. I typed a calm reply. "If you have 2,000 for me now, you had money for a caterer before. You chose the cheaper option, me. That option is no longer available." I pressed send and turned the phone face down. Minutes later it rang again. This time Brooke's voice shrieked through, brittle and furious. "You ruined my wedding. Do you hear me? You ruined it. All because you're selfish. You wanted attention, and now everyone's laughing at us. You're pathetic." I listened silent, then ended the call. My thumb hovered over block. But I didn't press it. Let her scream into the void if she wanted. Her words no longer had the power to twist the knife. They only revealed the blade she had always held. Margaret, sitting across the table, raised an eyebrow. "Still at it." "Still at it," I said. I set the phone aside and took another sip of tea. But the storm belongs to them now. I thought of the villa, of the dominoes falling one by one. No buffet. No childcare. Guests restless, parents outraged. Every whispered comment like a pebble dropped into a pond, ripples spreading. The photographer muttering about wasted time. The floors frowning as flowers wilted in the heat. Each moment collapsing into the next until the carefully staged illusion of perfection crumbled. And at the center of it all, Brooke, the bride who had wanted to parade her clever savings, now exposed for what they were, exploitation. I imagined her in that white dress, face red with fury, mascara streaking as she screamed into her phone. The irony was sharp enough to taste. She had wanted a flawless wedding to display to the world. Instead, she had a cautionary tale unraveling in real time. Later that evening another call came. This time from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Miller," a woman's voice said. "This is Carol, one of the parents at the wedding. I don't know you well, but I wanted to tell you something. The way they treated you, it wasn't right. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows what Brooke said. Don't let them make you feel guilty." Her voice was steady, kind. For a moment my throat tightened. Even strangers at the wedding could see the truth, while my own son had been blind. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." When the call ended, I sat very still, letting her words sink in. Even amid the wreckage, a kind of vindication was forming. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. Others had witnessed it. Others had named it. But Ethan kept calling. His messages shifted from bargaining to despair. "Mom, please. People are leaving. Brooke is falling apart. We don't know what to do. We're humiliated." I listened to one more, his voice breaking at the end. I don't understand why you do this to me." I closed my eyes. The ache in his words was real, but so was the blindness. "I didn't do this to you," I thought. "You did this to me. For years. And now you're seeing the cost." The dominoes kept falling at the villa. one after another. Guests slipped away early. The photographer packed up, muttering about wasted hours. Parents gossiped in corners, shaking their heads. What was meant to be the perfect seaside wedding was unraveling into chaos, and my absence rang louder than any toast or speech. As the sun set over the bay outside Margaret's window, I placed my phone face down once more. I let the sounds of the sea replace the desperate buzzing. They wanted me there in service. Instead, I chose to be here in peace. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I had chosen correctly. By Sunday morning, the storm had spread beyond the villa. My phone, still buzzing, still pulsing with demands, was no longer just filled with Ethan and Brooke's voices. Now new numbers appeared. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Each message was another shard of truth. Each one proof that their perfect facade had collapsed in public view. The first came from Michael, Brooke's father. His voice was low, heavy with the weariness of a man who had seen too much chaos. "Grace," he began, "it's Michael. I won't keep you long. I just want you to know, I told Brooke and Ethan they treated you shamefully. You don't dump 15 kids on one 72-year-old woman and call it love. I'm sorry. I raised her better than that, or I thought I did." His words settled into me like warm stones. Even Brooke's father, who had no reason to defend me, had seen the truth. Later, another voicemail came, this one from Carol, a mother of 2 of the children who had run wild through the villa. "Mrs. Miller, I don't know you well, but I needed to say this. The way they spoke about you, the way they expected you to work without asking, it was disgraceful. Everyone at that wedding knows what happened. People are talking not about you but about them. Please don't feel guilty. You did the right thing." I sat with Margaret at her kitchen table, the phone on speaker, both of us listening. When the message ended, Margaret gave a sharp nod. "See? Others noticed. Others are naming it. You're not crazy, Grace." For years I had carried that secret fear, that I was overreacting, that maybe my sacrifices were just what mothers did, that I was selfish for wanting acknowledgement. But hearing strangers call it out lifted something from me. My spine straightened. Then came the text from Amber, Brooke's sister, the very one who had laughed with her on the patio when I overheard the old lady remark, "It was a joke. We didn't mean it that way. Don't take it so seriously." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I typed back, "An expensive joke. $3,000 expensive. And my dignity on top of it." I hit send, then blocked her number. By afternoon, the messages shifted again. Some were apologies wrapped in excuses. Others were pure fury. Brooke's voicemail was particularly sharp. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Do you understand? My friends, my family, they think we're irresponsible now. You destroyed my wedding day." I deleted it without hesitation. Then came a call I didn't expect. Helen, my late husband David's sister. Her voice was steady, warm, but tinged with steel. "Grace," she said, "I heard what happened. And I want to tell you, my brother would have defended you in a heartbeat. You did right. Don't you doubt it for a second." I closed my eyes. David's face rose in my mind. His easy smile, the way his hand always found mine in a crowd, the way he had said, "Don't let anyone make you small." For 12 years, I had lived without his voice to anchor me. Now through Helen it felt like he was speaking again. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me," she replied. "You're finally standing where you should have been all along." That evening, as twilight settled over the bay, I walked the shoreline with Margaret. The tide was out, exposing stretches of wet sand and scattered shells. I bent to pick one up. A small broken piece, edges smoothed by the water. "That's you," Margaret said softly. "Not broken. Weathered. Stronger for it." I turned the shell over in my palm. For years, I had been the invisible strength holding others together. Now I was finally holding myself. Back at the house, I made tea and sat by the window. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A text from Ethan. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I got used to you always saying yes." For the first time, he admitted it. My eyes stung, but I didn't reply. Not yet. He needed to sit with his own words, to feel their weight without me rushing to forgive. Each ping on my phone that weekend had felt like a nail sealing up the coffin of my old role, the family's doormat, the endless giver. By Sunday night, that role was buried. And I, Grace Miller, 72 years old, stood over it with a steady back. By Sunday afternoon, the tide of calls and messages had ebbed into silence. For the first time all weekend, my phone lay motionless on the table. The quiet was almost eerie, as if the villa's chaos had finally burned itself out. I spent the morning walking along the waterfront in the little town near Margaret's home. The air smelled of salt and fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. Couples strolled hand in hand, children tugged at kites in the breeze, and the world looked untouched by the storm unraveling in my family. I bought a cheese roll from a vendor, sat on a bench and ate it slowly. Each bite was mine alone, not prepared for anyone else, not shared out of obligation. There was peace in that simplicity. No one demanded anything. No one expected me to solve a crisis. I was just Grace, an old woman with silver hair, eating warm bread by the sea. By 5 o'clock I was back home. The flight from Seattle had been smooth, the taxi ride quiet. When I stepped through my front door, the air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I'd left in the hallway drawer. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Tidy, calm, waiting. I put on the kettle, changed into a soft sweater, and settled into my chair by the window with a cup of tea. My suitcase sat unopened in the corner. For the first time in days, I exhaled into my own space. The doorbell rang. I set the cup down and rose slowly, already knowing who it would be. Ethan stood on the porch alone. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie gone, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a boy again, the boy who once came home from school with scraped knees, holding back tears until he saw me. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry." I held the door open but did not step aside to let him in. He shifted uneasily on the threshold, then spoke again. "I treated you like an employee, like a resource, not a mother." His words hung in the air, heavy and trembling. I nodded slowly. "Ethan, it wasn't just this weekend. It wasn't just one day. It's been 2 years of assumptions. 2 years of Brooke deciding what I'd do, and you letting her. 2 years of me saying yes while both of you stopped seeing me as a person." He winced. His shoulders hunched forward, the way they used to when he was caught in a lie as a boy. "I know. I got used to it. To you always saying yes." I studied his face, the lines of exhaustion, the shame creeping in. For the first time in years, he looked at me not as a fixture, not as background support, but as someone whose absence had weight. "But habits," I said quietly, "have debts too." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "Can I come in?" I stepped back just enough for him to enter. He moved into the living room and sat heavily on the sofa. His hands twisted together, restless. "Brooke, she doesn't understand," he began. "She grew up with stepmothers who didn't care. She doesn't know how to value someone like you. I should have defended you. I didn't. I was wrong." I listened, arms folded, standing across from him. "Does she see me as a person?" I asked, "or as a resource?" He stared at the floor. Silence stretched. Finally he whispered, "Until yesterday, the second." The honesty stung, but it was a wound I needed opened. "And you?" I asked. He lifted his eyes, and in them I saw the boy he had once been, the boy who promised I would sit in the front row. "I forgot you were more than someone who fixes everything. I forgot you had your own life." For a long time neither of us spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, a quiet witness. At last I said, "Ethan, if you want to rebuild anything with me, it has to start with rules. Real rules. Not words you forget in a week." He straightened slightly, as though bracing himself. "Tell me." "First," I said, my voice firm, "you ask. You never assume. Second, I am family at the table, not staff in the kitchen. Third, when I say no, it means no. No guilt trips, no manipulations. Fourth, if Brooke disrespects me, you defend me. Not because I'm fragile, but because that's your duty as a husband and a son." He nodded, each word sinking in like stones. "Yes, I agree. All of it." "For the first time in years," I said, softening only slightly, "this feels like a talk between mother and son, not boss and worker." His shoulders sagged with relief, but I held his gaze steady. This was not absolution. This was the first rung of a ladder he would have to climb. When he rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me completely." I said nothing, only closed the door after him, leaning against it for a moment. My tea had gone cold on the table, but the silence of my house was warm. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of David. You did right, I imagined him saying. You stopped letting them make you small. And for the first time in years, I slept without bitterness tightening my chest. The confrontation had not healed everything. It never could. But it had set the first stone on a new path, one built not on sacrifice alone, but on dignity. The morning after Ethan came to my door, the air in the house felt different. Not lighter, no, that would be too simple, but steadier, like the stillness after a storm has passed, when broken branches still litter the ground but the wind has finally gone quiet. I rose early, brewed my coffee and sat in silence, letting the steam warm my face. For once I didn't reach for my phone. I simply existed, unneeded, uncalled upon. Around mid-morning Ethan called. His voice was cautious, like a boy inching back into a room where he knew he had broken something. "Mom," he said, "Brooke wants to come over. She wants to apologize." I let the words sit between us. "An apology," I said slowly, "isn't a bridge. Not anymore. Words have been wasted already. Only actions matter now." "I know," he said quickly. "But, can you at least hear her out? Just once." I stared at the steam curling up from my cup. Part of me wanted to slam the door before it even opened. Another part, the mother part, the one that had raised him, the one that still ached for family, hesitated. "Fine," I said finally. "She can come. But understand this, Ethan. If she walks through that door with excuses instead of truth, it will be the last time." When I hung up, I felt the old tremor of nerves, the muscle memory of years spent trying to avoid conflict, smoothing every edge to keep peace. But then I looked around my living room, the neatly folded blanket on the armchair, the vase of fresh daisies I had bought for myself, the silence unbroken by demands, and I reminded myself, I was not her servant. I was not her safety net. I was Grace Miller. By the afternoon the knock came. I opened the door, expecting the carefully painted face I had grown used to, the Brooke who wore charm like a mask, all smiles and polite words that rang hollow. But the woman standing before me was different. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked younger, smaller, stripped of the armor she usually carried. "Miss Grace," she said softly, "can I come in?" I studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. She entered like a guest unsure of her welcome, her shoulders hunched, her hands twisting together. We sat across from each other at the table. For a moment silence pressed between us. Then she spoke. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice raw. "I treated you like staff. Like someone I could just assign things to. I didn't see you as a person. I see that now." I didn't reply. I let her words hang in the air, testing them, weighing them. Too often I had rushed to fill silence, to ease discomfort. Not this time. She swallowed hard and continued. "My mother died when I was young. My father remarried, and my stepmother, she was cold. She never cooked for me, never hugged me, never cared if I came home at night. I guess I grew up not knowing what it meant to respect an older woman. I learned to devalue them, to use them." Her voice broke, but I kept my gaze steady. "That explains," I said quietly. "But it doesn't excuse." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know. I can't take it back. But I want to do better. I want to change." I leaned forward slightly. "Brooke, an apology is a door, not a destination. You want change? Then prove it. Not in speeches. In actions." She wiped her eyes quickly. "Tell me what I can do." My voice was firm, deliberate. "First, tell your sister the truth. No softening it, no jokes. Tell her exactly what you said and why it was wrong. If you can't be honest with her, you'll never be honest with me." "I already did," she whispered. "Last night. I told her it wasn't a joke. That it was cruel. She didn't take it well. But I said it." For the first time I allowed a flicker of something like acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, just recognition. "Second," I said, "from now on you ask. You do not assume. You treat me as family at the table, not as staff in the kitchen. When I say no, you accept it. No sighs, no guilt, no manipulation. And when you speak of me, you speak with respect. even when I'm not in the room. Her shoulders shook as she nodded. Yes, I will. I promise. I studied her face. Stripped of its charm, it looked vulnerable, even frightened. But promises were cheap. I had heard too many. We'll see, I said finally. If your actions match your words, then maybe there will be a place for you in my life. But if they don't... I let the silence finish the sentence. She lowered her head, her tears dripping onto her hands. Thank you for giving me even that chance, she whispered. When she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk down the path to her car. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, as though she carried the weight of her own choices on her back. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The house was quiet again. The daisies on the table glowed softly in the afternoon light. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a beginning written on my terms. And for the first time in years, those were the only terms that mattered. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of rain against the windows. The sky outside was heavy and gray. The kind of weather that makes you want to wrap yourself in a blanket and stay inside all day. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured it into my favorite blue mug, and settled into my chair by the window. 4 years mornings had been filled with obligation. Planning meals, running errands, answering calls, adjusting my life around Ethan's needs. Now the rain fell and I had nowhere to be but here. No one to serve. No one to appease. Just me, the mug in my hands, and the silence of my own home. At 11, a knock came at the door. I knew who it would be. When I opened it, Brooke stood on the porch. She was different again, not just the absence of makeup but the absence of armor. Her clothes were simple. A loose gray sweater, jeans, no jewelry. She looked like a woman stripped bare of pretense, her face pale, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept. Miss Grace, she said quietly, may I come in? I nodded once and stepped aside. She entered like a visitor walking into a stranger's house, hesitant, unsure. We sat at the kitchen table. The daisies I'd bought for myself still stood in their vase, a silent witness between us. Brooke kept her hands folded in front of her, her knuckles white. I didn't come to repeat myself, she began. You already heard my apology yesterday. I came because I want you to understand why I was the way I was. Not as an excuse. Just context. Her voice trembled. I said nothing, only wrapped my hands around my mug and waited. When my mother died, I was 8, she said, staring at the table. My father remarried quickly. My stepmother was cold. She did the minimum, fed me, clothed me, but never more. She never hugged me. Never told me she loved me. She used to say I was just baggage from my father's first life. Brooke's voice broke on the last words. She pressed her fingers against her lips, then continued. I grew up thinking older women were obstacles. People who tolerated you, not people who loved you. When I met you, I didn't know how to accept the way you opened your home, your heart, your kitchen to me. So instead of valuing it, I used it. I twisted it. Because that's what I'd been taught. To take from women like you, not cherish them. I listened, the rain tapping softly against the window, the clock ticking on the wall. Her words reached me, but I did not let them soften me too quickly. That explains, I said evenly. But it doesn't excuse. You knew enough to call me Mom Grace when you wanted pie or flowers or favors. You knew enough to smile sweetly in front of Ethan. Respect isn't foreign to you, you just reserved it for when it benefited you. She winced, but she didn't look away. You're right. P***nice sweetness. I manipulated. And I see that now. It makes me sick when I think about it. I sipped my coffee. So what do you want from me? Not forgiveness, she said quickly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I want is a chance. A chance to prove with actions that I can treat you differently. That I can unlearn what I've been. Her voice was small, almost desperate. Please, just one chance. I set my mug down carefully, the sound echoing in the still kitchen. Words won't buy you a chance, Brooke. Only actions. And you've already taken the first step. You told Amber the truth. She nodded. I did. She didn't like it. She told me to stop being dramatic. But I said it anyway. I told her what I said to you was cruel and selfish. That I had reduced you to a job instead of honoring you as family. For the first time I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint possibility of trust fragile as glass. Then here are my terms, I said. From this day forward you ask. You never assume. If you want me in your life, you speak to me as a person, not a resource. You honor my no as much as my yes. And when you speak of me to others, you speak with respect. Not just when I can hear it. Her eyes filled with tears again. She nodded rapidly. Yes, I will. Promise. Don't promise, I said, my voice sharp. Show me. She inhaled shakily, then whispered, I will. We sat in silence for a long moment. The rain drummed steadily against the window. She looked at me with eyes stripped of calculation, and for the first time since she had entered my life, I saw not the actress but the frightened girl behind the role. Thank you, she whispered finally, for not closing the door completely. I rose and walked her to the door. She stepped out into the rain, pulling her sweater tight around her. For a moment she turned back, her face wet with both rain and tears. I'll prove it, she said. You'll see. Then she walked down the path, her shoulders hunched, her figure growing smaller in the gray drizzle. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the rain. My house was quiet again. The daisies still stood bright on the table. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the beginning of a test that would not be graded by words but by deeds. And for the first time I felt ready to be the examiner, not the servant. The days after Brooke's visit passed with an odd quietness, like a field after a wildfire, blackened, hushed, but carrying the faintest scent of new growth. I didn't rush to call Ethan, nor did I reach for my phone every time it buzzed. For the first time in years, I let silence do its work. And silence spoke. For 3 weeks, there were no last-minute requests for pies, no sudden texts asking if I could watch a neighbor's child just this once, no hints about bills or catering or errands. Instead, there was nothing. A space. A gap where my constant yes had once lived. At first, the emptiness unnerved me. Habit tugged at me like an old chain. Shouldn't I be planning something, buying something, fixing something? But every time I felt the pull, I reminded myself. The gap wasn't mine to fill. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan called. His tone was hesitant, almost formal. Mom? Brooke's birthday is coming up. We wanted to ask, just ask, if you'd like to help with decorations. We already booked the venue, hired a caterer, and covered everything else. We just love your eye for detail. But only if you want to. I let his words settle. The difference was stark. No assumption. No demand. A genuine request with the offer to decline. Yes, I said finally. I'd like to help. As a gift. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you, Mom. Really, thank you. The day of the party, I arrived to find a hall already filled with tables draped in linens, trays of food steaming under silver covers, waiters bustling. For the first time in years, I wasn't behind the scenes sweating over ovens. I was a guest. I decorated the tables with simple touches, candles, sprigs of rosemary, small jars of daisies. When the guests arrived, Brooke took the microphone to thank everyone. Then, to my surprise, she said clearly, "And a special thank you to Grace, who made this room beautiful tonight. Not with labor but with love." Applause followed. People turned and smiled at me, not as staff but as family. My chest tightened, not with bitterness but with something I hadn't felt in years, recognition. Later, as I sat at the table sipping champagne, a woman approached me. Carol, the same guest who had called me after the disastrous wedding. "You see?" she said, smiling warmly. "She's learning." I smiled faintly. "We'll see if it lasts." But inside I admitted it. Brooke had taken her first step. In the weeks that followed, action spoke louder than any apology. Brooke didn't call with requests. Instead, she sent updates. Photos of meals she had cooked herself, pictures of small home projects she and Ethan had done without my help. Then one evening, Ethan came by. He carried a copy of a flyer and handed it to me. "We booked catering for Brooke's baby shower next month," he said. "But Brooke wanted to ask if you'd be willing to contribute a recipe for the dessert table. Just the recipe. She says she'll credit you on the menu." I read the flyer. At the bottom in neat print it said, "Dessert recipes contributed by Grace Miller with gratitude." I traced the words with my finger. Gratitude, not expectation. "Yes," I said softly. I'll give you one. It was a small thing, but it mattered. A shift. Around that time, I received a letter from Carol again. She wrote that after the wedding fiasco, she and Michael, Brooke's father, had struck up conversations. Long ones. Honest ones. We owe you, she wrote. Because without that chaos, we might never have truly spoken. And Michael told Brooke he was ashamed of how she treated you. That she should take therapy seriously. Therapy. That word startled me. But weeks later, Brooke herself confirmed it. I've started seeing someone, she admitted during a Sunday visit. Her hand shook as she held her tea. It's hard. I don't like what I see in myself sometimes. But I need to learn. I nodded, not indulgently but firmly. Yes, you do. She didn't bristle at my tone. Instead, she nodded back. For months the pattern held. No manipulation. No guilt. Just small, deliberate actions. Ethan calling before decisions, Brooke speaking with respect, invitations framed as requests. I tested each one, watching closely, waiting for cracks. But though there were hesitations, there were no backslides. 6 months later, Ethan and Brooke came to me with news. They were expecting a baby. Brooke's voice trembled as she asked, "What kind of grandma do you want to be?" We want to ask, not assume. The question pierced me. 4 years I had been assigned roles without a word: cook, nanny, housekeeper. Now, for the first time, they were offering me choice. I'll help, I said slowly. When I want to. Not always. I'll live my life, and I'll be a grandmother when I choose. Ethan smiled, relief softening his face. That's all we ask. Brooke nodded quickly. That's more than enough. And in that moment I realized, the proof was in front of me. Not in grand gestures, not in flowery apologies, but in the simple everyday choices they were making. Choices that acknowledged me, not just my usefulness. It didn't erase the past. It never could. But it was the first time in years that the future felt like something I could walk toward without chains. And that, I decided, was proof enough for now. 6 months after the storm of that seaside wedding, Ethan and Brooke sat across from me at my dining table. Their hands clasped together, eyes bright. I had prepared tea and set out a plate of almond cookies, not out of obligation but because I wanted to. The daisies on the table had been replaced with fresh tulips I'd bought for myself that morning. A reminder that beauty could be chosen, not begged for. Brooke was the one who spoke first. Her voice trembled slightly, though it carried none of the arrogance it once had. "Miss Grace, we're expecting a baby." For a moment the air in the room thickened, heavy with memory, their assumptions, their demands, the villa chaos. My heart twisted, but I steadied it. I would not fall into old patterns. Ethan squeezed her hand and added softly, "We wanted to ask you, not tell you, not assume, what kind of grandmother you want to be. We'll honor whatever you say." Their words pierced me. In the past, I would have been handed the role without choice. Free babysitter, night nurse, permanent help. Now they were offering me something new: agency. I took a slow breath. I will help when I want to. Not always. Not automatically. I have my own life and I intend to live it. I'll be a grandmother, but on my terms. They both nodded. No protest. No guilt trip. Just quiet acceptance. It was the first time I truly believed change might be possible. As months passed, Brooke's belly grew, and with it, her actions continued to prove her words. She called me sometimes, not for favors but simply to ask how I was. She invited me to lunches where everything was prepared already, no expectations for me to bring pies or dishes. Ethan too shifted. When we spoke, he no longer began with, "Mom, can you?" but with, "Mom, how are you?" Small changes, but they mattered. Then came the baby shower. This time, the invitations were printed with bold letters. Catering provided. Decorations by professional staff. At the bottom, in elegant script, it read, "Dessert recipes contributed by Grace Miller with gratitude." When I arrived, the hall was buzzing with chatter and laughter. Tables groaned with food, not made by my hands, but arranged by strangers paid to do the work. For the first time, I walked into a family celebration not as staff but as guest. Brooke stood at the microphone, her voice steady. "I want to thank everyone who came, and especially Grace, who shared her recipes for tonight's desserts. Not by cooking them, not by laboring, but by gifting us her wisdom. Thank you, Grace." The applause that followed was different than at her birthday. It wasn't polite, it wasn't forced. It was genuine. My chest ached, but not from bitterness. From the strange, almost painful sensation of finally being seen. After the shower, people came to me with compliments. Your lemon tart recipe is divine. The pecan bars were heavenly. They looked at me as the author of something beautiful, not the hands behind unpaid labor. For the first time in decades, I stood not in the kitchen but in the spotlight of my own choosing. It was around that time that I began writing again. I pulled out an old notebook where I had once scribbled recipes, stories, and reflections. Page by page, I began to shape them into something larger, a book. Not just recipes but lessons. Cooking with love but serving with dignity. I wrote late into the night, the words pouring out of me as if I had been holding them back for years. When the book was finished, Ethan hosted a small launch party. Guests gathered in a local cafe, sipping tea and tasting dishes made from my recipes. Brooke stood proudly at my side, holding up the book for photographs. She taught me that love isn't servitude, Brooke told the audience honestly. Her flight on our wedding day was the hardest lesson of my life, but also the most important. I watched her speak and felt the weight of irony. The woman who had once mocked me as the old lady now stood as my advocate, my student. Proof perhaps that change, slow, painful but real, was possible. Months later, when the baby was born, Ethan and Brooke brought her to me, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. They didn't hand her to me with instructions. They simply asked, "Would you like to hold her?" I cradled the tiny weight in my arms, her warmth pressing against my chest. My eyes stung. This time there was no manipulation behind the gesture, no assumption that I would take over care. Just an offering. Brooke whispered, her voice trembling. "Can I call you Mom Grace?" I looked at her, the girl who had once smirked on my patio, who had once laughed as she labeled me the old lady. And I saw something different. Not perfection, not redemption, but effort. Effort made visible in actions. "Yes," I said softly. "You can." As I rocked my grandchild, I felt a strange, powerful truth settle into me. The loudest yes of my life had come from my firmest no. A year after that disastrous seaside wedding, I stood on a stage at a community center, signing copies of my book. People lined up, not to demand pies or babysitting, but to honor my voice. Ethan carried boxes for me, proud, not entitled. Brooke handed out cookies, smiling not as a manipulator but as a daughter-in-law who had learned. And later that night, as I sat in my quiet kitchen with a cup of tea, I thought back to the moment Ethan had screamed into the phone, "Where are you?" And I remembered my answer. Calm, steady, final. "I'm on the plane." The silence that followed had been heavier than any lecture, sharper than any rebuke. It was the sound of chains breaking. Now, holding my grandchild with my book on the table and my dignity intact, I knew that silence had changed everything. And I promised myself I would never, ever let anyone rewrite me into servitude again.